Welcome to the Classical Gabfest, a weekly discussion about the ever-changing world of classical music. I'm your host for this week, Tiffany Liu, and with me as always are Kensho Watanabe and William White. This week we'll be discussing a wave of fake violin busking that's cropped up around the country. Then we'll look at a documentary from The New Yorker. And finally, we'll discuss classical music's alcohol problem. But first, we'd like to start with our Prelude segment. So, Kensho, what do we have today?
This week, we'll be playing a round of everyone's favorite game, Listening Limbo. In this game, I will name a category of works, say for example, Beethoven symphonies, and our contestants will wager the amount of listening time they think it would take them to identify a piece in that category. After the wagers are in, they'll each hear the clip for the amount of time they've specified, and the contestant with the correct answer in the shorter amount of time wins the round. So, we have 3 categories as always. The first category is a little bit of a new spin to the game here.
Oh, good.
The category is Kensho's selections for the classical mixtape.
Oh, how interesting.
You know, just trying to check if you guys are actually paying attention to the things that I'm suggesting.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to hear how you would do on either of our selections for the mixtape.
So I've flipped a coin, and Tiffany will begin the bidding.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to do great on this, I have to say, Kensho. I'm going to need something fairly healthy if I'm going to have a chance at this. So let's go with 8 seconds.
Okay, I'm going to bid 7 seconds just because, I mean, you know, Kensho, he recommends a lot of this, like, I don't know, unappealing new music a lot of the time. And but I'm going to bid lower because I'm the guy that does the edit. And if in the off chance that he uses a bit of this that is the bit that I have chosen to lay down as the mixtape selection, then I would have a decent enough shot.
Just to clarify, when you say unappealing new music, you mean Bruckner, yes?
That's unappealing old music, which you tend to recommend a lot of too. So, yeah.
You curmudgeon, you. All right, well, we'll bid lower, so I guess Tiffany goes first, right?
I think so, yeah.
All right, here are your 8 seconds of this unidentified piece of music.
Well, it's definitely not new music, and it's not altogether unappealing either. So, yeah, the category is no help to me. So I'm just gonna have to think about this. Romantic viola sonata. I mean, I guess I don't know the Brahms viola sonatas, so it's just as good a guess as any. I'll go with Brahms viola sonata. I'm not even sure how many he has. Maybe he has 2. I'm afraid I can't tell you which one or narrow down the movement.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, it doesn't matter.
Great.
This is the opening of the slow movement of Dochnany's quintet,
Nice.
piano quintet.
All right.
With the lovely viola solo. All right, well, you know, we start with the harder categories first, so it's going to only get easier from here.
Oh, good.
All right, William. I mean, this is a tough category because it spans, you know, a lot of things.
In other words, I missed.
Tiffany was not able to identify this in 8 seconds, but here are your 7 seconds, and see if you can get it.
This might as well just be Name That Tune.
Yeah.
I really don't. Gosh, I don't remember you recommending anything like this.
Unappealing and new, I know, I'm sorry.
No, that was actually quite appealing and not new. Happy to hear it.
That's exactly what I said.
Yeah. Gosh, okay, let's see. It's not the Hindemith Spa Quartet. I'm trying to go from week 1.
Go from week
It's
1,
not like a
62 weeks
Bruckner
later.
Symphony. It's not, oh boy, God. I got nothing here. I don't know. It sounded
I'm just
like,
gonna have to play it like Name That Tune.
yeah, exactly.
You can't miss since
I think it was a
since I
viola
missed.
sonata. I think that was a viola, not a cello. I don't know. It could have been like Clara Schumann or something, or that's my guess. Clara Schumann viola romance. What is this?
This is the third movement of Dochnani's piano quintet. It starts with the viola solo.
Wow. Okay, well played. That was fair enough. Yeah.
This was a
I like that
tough
category.
one.
Gives me an idea for a
just
future
to...
category, interestingly enough.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
That's going to be hell for us.
Things that we missed on Name That Tune.
Oh, that would be an interesting one. That would be a good
Oh,
one.
my goodness. No.
It's like, have we been going to school the last year or not?
That would be amazing, actually. That's a really good idea, too.
All right, second category you'll be happy to hear is a little bit more manageable, and it will be Revel orchestral works.
Ooh, funsies. Okay. Revel, a major composer with not a huge output. I feel like I am pretty familiar with his orchestral works, and I know darn well that my competitors here, Tiffany, is quite familiar with Revel. So I've got to bid pretty aggressively here, and my bid is going to be 3 seconds.
Ooh,
Yeah, that's a hard one to undercut.
aggressive. I like it.
The problem is Revel tends to he reuses harmonic language, so that with anything less than that, it's quite difficult to place, even if I recognize something. So the question is, do I go 2 seconds or do I go like 10 seconds? And bake on Will not getting it. What the hell, I'll go 2.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Okay.
I love it.
All right, so Tiffany is going away, and Will will get his 3 seconds first. William, are you ready for your 3 seconds?
Oui.
All right, on y va.
Oh my God. How dare you?
screwed yourself.
How dare you? Ah.
I mean, maybe I should change it just because I thought that you guys would bid way higher than this. This is where you should, this is actually a good lesson for all of us to say we shouldn't be too aggressive.
So
in
that's
our
what we're
bids.
here to teach each other lessons.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I think the best I can do is rule out a couple of things. It's not the left-hand piano concerto, not Daphnis and Chloe. It's not La Valse. I don't think it's Valse Noble et Sentimentale, but that's a possibility. This could come from the second movement of the G major piano concerto. It's not like Sagan.
Let's say orchestral works. I will eliminate concertos for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I don't think it's Tombeau de Couperin. But boy, there's not much to go on here. There's really not much to go on here. I mean, I heard like an overhang string chord and like one bass pits. I'm just gonna say Mother Goose Suite.
I'm gonna
Is
give it.
Is
to
it from
you.
the full ballet of Mother Goose?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna give it to you.
All right.
Congratulations. Well done.
Thank
well
you.
played.
Thank
Wow.
you.
Okay, miraculously, Will was able to identify this in
All
3
right,
seconds.
so it's a good thing I went with low with the bet.
Yes.
You might not feel that way when you hear this.
I know, but it's a good, because otherwise there wouldn't be a chance for me to do this, right?
Fair.
Like if I had gone bigger.
Yes.
That's what
And
I'm saying.
in fairness, I said orchestral works for Revel. I'm eliminating the concerti.
Oh, okay.
Here we go. 2 seconds of this piece. Here we go. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, where do I even start? I guess I can eliminate a few. I'll eliminate La Valse, I think. I'll eliminate Unbark. I think I can eliminate the Valse Noble et Sentimentale. I guess this could be one of those like atmospheric places in Daphnis, but I would be hard pressed to say about from what. And where does that leave me? Pavon? I'll go with Pavon.
Well, you had nothing to go on. Unfortunately, that is not correct. It is from Mother Goose, and I was telling Will this because I was thinking that maybe we were going to be in the realm of 5 or 6 seconds for this bidding, and if we had continued this, we would have heard this, which is very identifiable as Mother Goose. So, William, you take this round, and this brings us to a highly exciting final round. Beethoven symphonies.
Oh, it's my bet, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I definitely know all the notes of all this. Do I want to play it? I'll call 3 seconds safe for this. So the question is, do I want to go 3 or do I want to force Will into a 1 second bet and go 2 seconds? Let me think. I mean, there are spaces, not many of them in Beethoven's. So the problem with, 2 seconds in the Revel is that I only got one chord, which was not workable. And so I'm trying to think, are there moments like this in Beethoven symphonies? Which there's not many. I mean, he generally has stuff going on. He doesn't luxuriate in one thing for that long. Let's see. I'll go 3 seconds.
I'm up 1. Is that right? Because the first one was nobody got a point for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I might as well go 2 then. 2 seconds. Come on.
Okay.
We're playing a game here. Let's have some fun.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Enjoy yourselves,
Will.
guys.
All right, Tiffany, here we go. Here's 3 seconds of a Beethoven symphony.
Let me just make sure I have the right. Okay. It is that's in D major, right? So that's got to be the third movement of number 2. Let me just make sure. Yeah, it's the third movement of number 2.
That's correct.
Great. Well,
Nicely
Will's
done.
probably going to get this.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see about 2 seconds.
All
All right, Will.
And
Tiffany nailed it with 3 seconds.
Oh, boy.
So pressure's on to hit this in 2 seconds.
Oh, boy.
Are you ready?
yeah, I'm ready.
Here we go.
Okay. I know what it is. I mean, I can sing it. It's always that thing, but can I identify it? Man, so it's a scherzo movement, and I believe it's actually the trio. And one of those. I keep getting stuck at the end. I can't figure out what comes next after the trio. It's really rough.
You've got it.
I'm just gonna have to guess. Actually, it's the Second Symphony trio.
Good guess.
Is that correct?
It's correct. Yeah.
Oh, praise!
Well done.
Wow.
Nice extrapolation there.
Thank you.
So you take it away this game. 2 points to you.
Nice.
Well sussed out.
Nice. That was a fun one.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, I know.
I'm very demoralized.
Oh, sorry.
That just about does it for this week's Prelude segment, but before we wrap up, we'd like to remind our listeners that we do periodic listener-generated Name That Tune rounds, so we invite you to try and stump us. Check our show notes, where you'll find the link to the forum where you can upload a 30-second clip of an unidentified piece of classical music for us to try to identify. And before we move on, a programming announcement. Our next book club segment is coming up on our January 6th episode. This time around, we're going to read a book that was a listener suggestion. Madeleine Thien? How do we discuss Thien? Madeleine Thien's Do Not Say We Have Nothing. We'll have a link in the show notes for anyone who cares to read along with us. And with that, we move on to our first topic. Will, what do you have for us?
Our first topic today comes from my ancestral homeland of Montgomery County, Maryland, but it represents a larger nationwide trend, a scam in which ersatz buskers set up portable sound systems in grocery store parking lots and fake playing the violin, usually accompanied by a cloying pop backing track. Here's a clip from the local NBC News affiliate in Washington, D.C.
Out of their money.
This video, shot recently in Woodbridge, Virginia by News 4's Julie Carey, shows a man with a young girl in which the man appears to be playing the violin. A sign behind him reads, "Please help me. I have 2 kids, need help for rent and food." A sign very similar to the one in the photo police tweeted out yesterday. Shira Goff says these panhandlers have been spotted at shopping centers all over Montgomery County.
I have seen them in the Kentlands.
In recent days, there have been videos cropping up where actual musicians film themselves confronting the fake violinists, and the assembled crowd gets mad at the confronters for insulting the fake violinists. I have definitely seen and heard this scam in operation here in Seattle, where I now live. But I think that while this scam may be new to the US, it goes back a while further, because I distinctly remember seeing it in Europe as far back as 2017. What about you guys? Have you seen this in the wild? Have you ever, like, Kensho, have you ever seen this in a town square in some, like, European place?
No, I'm just more accustomed to seeing the people that paint themselves gold or silver, and they sit on that pole
they
or whatever that make
right,
it look like they're levitating or whatever.
Yeah. What about you, Tiff? Have you seen this?
Well, it's funny, like not 3 days after we confirmed this as the topic for our podcast, I ran into it at Whole Foods, just down the street.
And did you confront?
And what did you do? Yes,
I did not. It's one of those things where like you can think to yourself, or you can fantasize in the shower about what you would do, when such and such a, how you like you're taking a shower and you're like making up these conversations in your head about what you would do and like how badass you'd be. I did nothing. I stood there. Well, what happened was I heard it as I was coming up, and I was like, oh, am I about to encounter this thing? And then I saw it, and I took a second. I took about 10 seconds to like just actually eyeball them and see whether it was real or not, and it was definitively not real. And then I even heard some people around me kind of remarking, oh, that's so lovely, or whatever, and then I went on my way and went grocery shopping.
Interesting. And how would you describe the musical content?
Oh, so I mean, I don't know, do you guys feel like this kind of ambient, nondescript pop beat plus nondescript melody? I mean, it's not on the nose, it's not well known enough, it's not singable enough for people to recognize one way or another whether something is, I'm not even going to say good, is real or not.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just generic.
It's
like
very
this kind
generic.
of ambient, kind of shopping mall soundtrack, right?
Like I described it in my intro as cloying, and I think that there's something that like they're going for the world's tiniest violin kind of a thing. Like they want to add that extra layer of emotionality, because I think that's like why you do this scam, is you're trying to play on people's heartstrings a little bit. You want to make it seem like you're the down and out talented person who passersby should give their money to. And I think that they amplify it with these like signs that say, oh, I have 2 kids, and I lost my job because of COVID, and this and that and the other, and probably none of that's true. And I think that the musical content is even trying to be like the soundtrack to that sob story on top of it. Was that your experience of it?
Well, I guess I don't know if I had dared to go to that level of kind of metaphoric.
I don't think anybody
thinking.
does.
That's a little
so
too
far.
poetic to me.
Oh, interesting.
But I see what you mean. Okay, so here's where I'm going to come down on it. Is that like, yes, that is sort of fitting in a way, but it also, that kind of music is experiencing a vogue, I feel like, just in the general consciousness. And I think there's 2 things that I want to pick apart here. One is the public's general, lack of education to be able to detect whether this is real. Because there were people as I was standing there for those 10 seconds, 3 people walked up and dropped bills in the case, right? So there's kind of a general inability to distinguish what the hell is going on, one. And then on the other side, we have to imagine, okay, who is doing this kind of thing? What is actually happening in their lives? Are they actually homeless? Probably is true, Will, what you say probably is true. They're not, homeless with 3 kids and lost job because of COVID, but we can generally imagine that they're probably not doing too well.
Right.
And then what does it mean that they are pulling this kind of a sympathy ploy? Does it mean that, it's kind of funny. It must be real easy to get your hands on an electric violin and an amp these days, and it must be kind of easy to figure out what the motion is. I don't know. There's something interesting going on the other side here that I'm kind of interested in.
Well, one possible answer to that I found on a Reddit thread about this question, which I'll link in the show notes, was the idea that they're doing this to get around vagrancy and panhandling laws. Because, you're allowed to busk. I mean, oftentimes you need a permit, like certainly on the New York City subway system or something like that. You're supposed to have a permit. But maybe in suburban districts where homelessness is rising, or even in cities, and we've talked about this, right, with the Fred Meyer parking lot. I mean, all of our news comes from parking lots these days for some reason. But, they're trying to move people out of the way. And this might be a way to do it.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that, because the coda to my experience there at Whole Foods was when I was inside and checking out with my groceries, I asked the cashier, like, do you guys have anything to do with the people who are out there? And the cashier completely, like, total disclaimer, no, we don't have anything to do with them. I was like, but do you do anything about them when they come? No. It's not. They're doing what they do. You know, like they totally did not want to engage me over it. And I was like, because you know that they're not actually playing the violin. And like, kind of total hand waving me away.
Of course,
it's fine. You know.
So let's move to from fake busking to real busking. Kensho, have you ever busked? Like, you know, actually played the violin? Yeah.
I mean, it's been a while. But my favorite story from this was when I was at the pre-college division at Juilliard. I think I remember I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, and we had just finished our juries. Like I guess it was like May or something. And juries are like where you like have to basically audition again in front of all the like teachers of, you know, or at least the violin teachers at pre-college or whatever. So we were dressed like, you know, we had like suits on or whatever. And I remember one of my older studio mates was like, hey, I'm going to go play on the street with my suit on. Do you want to come join me? And I was like 10. I was like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. And we like just, you know, opened the case, and, you know, I was pretty cute at 10 years old. So we made a lot of money that day just playing on the street in New York. Certainly didn't have a permit. We just did it after our juries, and we had a good time.
What about you, Tiff?
I'm sure the answer is yes, but I don't really remember. I mean, those kinds of opportunities come and you just, I mean, you don't think much of it, or at least if you're doing it right, you don't think much of it. And this comes to the more important, I don't know, busking is something that we, you know, as classical trained musicians, you might be tempted to look at it and be like, ugh, you know, like those people who don't know what they're doing, or, you know, like there's a sense of like when you're doing something in the concert hall or that you're doing properly, right? And then there's another sense that happens when classical musicians try and busk, and I don't know, for me, it sometimes strikes the wrong tone. Like it's, you know, like I'm not going to get out my violin and play a bunch of Mozart, you know, unaccompanied sonatas or like whatever. That just feels weird. It feels weird. And there's a different standard by which I want to judge successful or good busking. You know, like there's and it's not quite the same as just hearing good music.
Do you guys remember, this was maybe, a good 10 or 15 years ago now, this Pulitzer Prize winning article in the New York Times where Joshua Bell pretended to be a busker on the New York City subway. I think it was a New York City subway system. It might have been DC. And, you know, he dressed down. He like wore a baseball cap, you know, covered his face, and played some virtuoso, like Bach.
I think he was just playing solo Bach the entire time. And yeah, I mean, this made the rounds for years, this article. And of course, the headline, like the lead is that he, like, no one paid him any attention at all, hardly. There's video of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people just walking by him.
But was that surprising to us anyway? I mean, this might be a hot take, but like, why the hell would you play Bach? Like if you're busking, I just feel like, you know, it's know your performance space, right?
Yeah, again, there's a different standard.
Right. I think the more interesting article for the Times would be to pit Joshua Bell against the fake busker, you know, pop people with the backing track and see who makes more money.
Oh, I mean, that's no question. It's not going to be Josh Bell. I mean, I think we all can agree with that.
One thing that this did make me think about is, like, every time that we do a movie club, all we do is complain about actors fake playing violin. And, you know, in a way, how is that so different from this? I mean, those actors might be getting $1 million to star in some movie where they fake playing the violin.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know. I really, it doesn't bother me in the slightest.
Really?
That this is something that people are doing. I don't know. Should I be bothered by this?
No, it doesn't bother me that people are doing it. It bothers me that people are like dumb enough to like throw your $5 bills in. That's what bothers me.
So, Kensho, if you were to come across this, what would you do? Would you be one of the confrontational people? Like, would you call them out or
no?
What would you...
I mean, like, if they're making money off of that, great, good for you. Like, I don't know. I watched a YouTube video that you posted of like a professional violinist reacting.
Yeah.
And one of the first clips is like some kid that's like, you know, faking shredding on an electric violin. And I'm like, it's actually, in a way, if you take away the fact that it's clearly faking, it's actually kind of impressive that he's been able to like sync it up and make it kind of look like he's playing the electric violin, and the energy that he has playing or fake playing the violin I mean, how far away is that from? Oh man, this is a hot take. How far away is this from Lindsey Sterling?
Oh wow! Amazing.
I mean, I would never be the one to confront the person doing it.
Right.
But what I would do is, if I was with somebody, especially somebody who was not a musician, right? I would take a second and be like, so take a look at this right here. You know, like for me doing this segment on the podcast, I want it to be kind of a PSA of like, this is how you tell. Okay, so one of the first things that you can kind of tell is that there is a distinct sound of when a string instrument is slurring notes and when a string is doing them on separate bows. And what I mean, and of course this is for a lot of the extremely unstring initiated folks who might be part of our listenership, right? Which is that in these kind of poppy tracks, there's a sense of like long lines. They're often very legato. They're long kind of connected notes. And when you put a note in a different bow, by which I mean there's a change in the bow direction, that has a very distinct break in the sound. And that is one of the very early indicators that you can use to try and decide, is that real or not? And of course, the other is timing, which generally, actually, frankly, these fake buskers have down. I mean, if the notes are changing faster, they move their bow faster. So that's fine. But one of the really easy indicators is whether something is being slurred or not, by which I mean putting multiple notes in the same direction of the bow.
You know, the other thing that I was thinking about this is like, I wonder if the person who's making the real money on this scam is whoever is making the tracks. In the way that there's like, you know, the big drug kingpin who like farms out. Yeah, is somebody, I wonder if somebody is actually doing the investment, you know, if there's like somebody who's buying all of the equipment and making the tracks and stuff and then like just farming this out to the individual people. And if
I
they get
really want that to be like some really well-known classical composer that's doing it as a side hustle.
But here's my question for you guys. Would you, let's say you had the opportunity, if somebody said like, hey, you know, Kensho, you want to make a little extra money? I got this thing. You could record some tracks for me. Would you do it?
Yes, with like choreography also included for like extra money, right? To like make sure it's all like
Kensho wants to be Lindsey Sterling.
Yeah, and this is where it's all going. It's just the fact that this is my calling and I missed it, you know.
Oh boy.
Conducting is just the side hustle.
Yeah. What is conducting if not just fake music making anyway?
Exactly. No, this is where I'm coming from. No, but actually like so much of like what is interpreted or received by an audience of what we do as conductors is like our physical energy. So this is kind of predicated on the fact that like if you bring enough like energy to your performance, it doesn't matter if you have an instrument or a box in your hand, it just makes sense, right? So
one of the things I feel is reflected in the sudden spurt of media coverage of this topic is like the anxiety people have about being tricked into believing something is real. I mean, like that is real, I think, and especially now more than ever, you know, this age of scams and Nigerian princes and all this.
All right, well, listeners, we'd be very interested to know if you have seen this at your local Whole Foods parking lot, just as Tiffany and I have. And what would you do if you ran into this in the wild? We would love to hear from you. All right, with that, on to our next topic. Tiffany.
Last month, The New Yorker released a short documentary called The Voice Break Choir. Directed by Martina Karlstedt and Ina Holmqvist, it depicts members of the Stockholm Boys Choir revealing their most intimate hopes, fears, and desires as they inhabit the liminal space between boyhood and manhood. Let's hear a clip.
Istället för att du liksom får ut luften.
Jag tror, alltså jag hade den igår liksom.
Ja, du har den nu också, jag är säker på det. Ja.
As Jason Kotke writes, puberty is tough on everyone, but for members of boys' choirs it can be especially hard. When their voices start to crack, this instrument that they've spent years tuning and perfecting is suddenly thrown all out of whack, shifting from soprano to alto or even bass in a matter of months. Often, teen boys will quit singing in the choir when their voices crack, but the Stockholm Boys Choir works with boys going through these changes, empowering them to perform while they wait for their voices to develop, an essential intermediate step between the high notes of the boys' choir and the deeper tones of the men's choir. The documentary goes further than this, though, to depict how in many ways these challenges mirror and become metaphor for the larger struggles of puberty. The choristers talk about how activities that once were fun are suddenly uncool, how they feel about predominant conversation topics like sports, and their struggles with fear and insecurity and the various things that they have done to assuage them. Upon reflection, a number of the choristers recognize that their voice change and maturation, they are gaining something even as they lose something. This attitude of self-discovery is something Holmquist hopes will stick with viewers. Puberty is not only something ugly and uncomfortable, it can also be strengthening, she said. Whether apprehensive or excited about their new phase of adolescence, all of the boys are keenly attuned to the process of transformation. So we've linked the documentary in the show notes. It's not long. It's maybe about 25 minutes, and recommend that you take a peek before you listen to the segment. But what did you guys think?
I love this. I don't know. It made me all warm and happy inside for some reason. I was also just really struck by how introspectively aware a lot of these children were in terms of really actually going through and explaining what they were going through. I don't know if at the time of puberty I would have been able to so well articulate everything that I was thinking or feeling at that moment.
I agree with you 100%, Kensho, about the analysis, but my reaction is exactly the opposite. This is too awkward for me. It's like taking people at the most vulnerable point of their life, somehow getting them to explain everything. When I was that age, I would never talk so openly about my feelings and stuff. And I don't really want to see it from these people. It takes me back to a time that I would rather not re-experience, quite honestly. It was too raw. I couldn't take it. I had a negative reaction to this.
Would you rather have been more produced?
I would rather have heard more from the teacher. I would have been really interested to hear her perspective more. She's very much a sideline character. I mean, you just see her, running scales a couple times with the boys.
In terms of her assessment of how these kids are developing.
Yeah, and how she runs the choir and stuff, and what she, what just her take on what these kids are going through.
The documentary wasn't really about the choir, was it?
It wasn't about the choir. No, it was much less about the choir. Yeah,
it was way more about just these kids going through it.
Yeah, but
right?
So then one of the main things in this choir, I mean, which we could discern about how it works, is that the kids, maybe it was just part of this documentary, I don't know, but they created music based on their experiences, based on the things that they were talking about. They sort of crafted those into lyrics, and then they sang these songs where they talked about their intense vulnerabilities and how it used to be okay to play tag when they were in 6th grade, but now that they're in 8th grade, you have to play football or you're not cool, and how they feel weird and awkward and in between. And I was just oh my God, if these kids watch these songs, if they go back and watch this documentary 20 years from now, they are going to cringe so hard that they revealed so much of themselves at this baby picture era. I don't know. Tiffany, maybe I'm way off here. What do you think?
My experience of puberty was different. I do remember the era in my life at which it suddenly became less cool to engage in activities rather than talk. You know how when you're young, all the adults ever do during parties is talk. How can that possibly be interesting? Can't we build a fort or whatever? I just endless strings of afternoons as a middle schooler being what do you guys want to do? What do you guys want to do? We always had to find something to do. And then all of a sudden that's not cool anymore. You're playing with, toys and pillows and whatever, and the real people talk. So that I do remember. But as far as what these boys are going through, I mean, I appreciate, Will, that it makes you uncomfortable, but I think that's why they did this, because I can't imagine that it makes the boys any less uncomfortable than it makes you. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, right.
I imagine that in 10 years when they view this, they can be quite proud of what they aired here. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What about you guys? I mean, one of the things that I found rewarding about this watching experience was that there was an effort to kind of humanize the process of puberty. Because what happens in puberty is that you suddenly have this conflict between what's going on inside you and what is going on, for people's perceptions of you outside of yourself. Mm-hmm. And so what was your guys' experience of that? Do you guys remember when your voices dropped? Do you have experiences surrounding that or anxieties that it brought up, or larger experiences of puberty as especially as a musician, actually?
I mean, it may all just be repression, but I don't remember much of my voice changing. I know that it did, obviously, and the only thing that I remember is now it's less so. But I don't know if Will had the same thing too. But my internal voice was still unchanged.
Oh wow, that's
or
interesting.
like the way that I thought I sounded was still very much of my previous like voice range. So it kind of goes in line with how everybody hates the sound of their voice. Like for me, it was like shocking to hear actually like, you know, a recording of my speaking or something where I was like, this is not at all, like, doesn't sound like me.
Oh,
and
that's really interesting.
It took years for me to actually like put together what I thought I sounded like in my head and what I actually sounded like. So I remember that was the only thing that kind of stayed with me in terms of my voice changing, let's say.
What about you, Will?
Well, okay, so that's interesting. I mean, like, I'm someone whose voice has barely changed because, you know, like, and this is something to talk about actually with boys going to men's choir is that, like, I went from alto to tenor, and like I can still like in my choir that I sing in, like, you know, I'm a first tenor, but sometimes like we don't have enough altos, they throw me on alto. And that's the typical thing. And usually sopranos go to bass, like a low bass. So I wonder, Kensho, if your speaking voice as a child or singing voice was probably pretty high.
I think it was quite high. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've ended up with this rich, mellifluous bass. But yeah, I do remember, you know, being aware of when my voice was changing. It was probably more gradual than in Kensho's case. So like, I don't think that I ever had that discrepancy in terms of my interior monologue and my exterior vocalization.
Well, that's something that I think a lot of us deal with, which I think is actually a fairly distinct phenomenon. I still don't like listening to this podcast mostly because I hear my voice on it. So,
oh, that's interesting.
You know. But do either of you remember a period in which it was hard to control your voice?
Oh, yeah. Well, especially for musicians, right? Because I remember just like weekly going to solfege class, our ear training class, and having to like sing or sight sing or whatever. And, you know, you kind of learn early on to kind of, you know, hop an octave up or down based on, you know, where your range is. And I remember just thinking that I could hit that range up top and then be like, oh no, I can't anymore. And that'll change. And that's one thing I really liked about the documentary was that the chorus teacher would actually kind of like check in on them throughout the process where, you know, someone that wasn't quite hitting the low notes, suddenly the next time like they were hitting like low C's and low B's. And I was kind of like, wow. So to see that is definitely something that I remember experiencing as well in terms of just understanding where your vocal range is, especially when you're singing regularly.
Yeah, and by the way, I want to make it clear that I think that the work that this choir is doing is great. I just think it's a little weird that the New Yorker made a documentary out of it.
I love that you feel the need to like clarify this.
Well, no, because like I think this is a very laudable project that they're doing.
All
making
the Swedish
this special...
children are going to come after you now.
Well, and that's another thing I want to talk about. It is interesting that this is taking place in Sweden because, you know, Northern Europe, specifically Sweden and like Northern Germany and the Netherlands and I would say Estonia, are the homes of, like, that is choir central. So part of the thing that was interesting for me, or that I was sort of curious going into watching this, was like, these places have the top choirs in the world. I was very curious to see, like, what is the culture? And really, it looked very familiar. Like, these boys, you know, I mean, they were speaking Swedish, but other than that, you know, I thought they could have been Americans. They're probably a little bit more willing to expose, like, vulnerabilities than many Americans would be, I'm presuming. I mean, I don't know what the kids are into today. But, you know, I thought that this was interesting. I guess that made a little bit more sense why this documentary was made. But overall, I was just like, I couldn't believe it that they were doing this.
Well, it speaks to, again, like you said, the tradition, right? That they would even care enough to create this choir for those that are changing voices to ensure that no one really loses interest because of that fact.
Right.
And that they can continue to kind of feed into the adult choirs that they have that are presumably very, very good.
Yeah, and that's probably part of the reason why they have this success is that they nurture it through this very awkward phase.
I appreciate both of your perspectives on this. Will, may I submit that your unease with the depiction here is a product of the American kind of you know, landscape around, you know, because imagine if this documentary had been produced here, you wouldn't be able to find 13, 14-year-old boys who would not, even if they were willing to approach the topics that are approached here, there would be a distinct awareness of how reality television is constructed. And in fact, the production would have aimed itself towards that value, right? You would have had kids being like exaggerating their stories or like kind of putting on a very confident face. And what was refreshing about these boys as they appeared on screen was their lack of confidence. They were trying to approach these topics in this very unvarnished way. And there was no, I mean, I don't know what the production behind that was, but there was obviously no producer being like, well, do you like girls? You know, like there's no goading that's going on here, I don't think, you know, and or at least if it was done very tastefully. And one of the most touching subjects I thought that was kind of broached was the boys' fear of losing something as they matured, right? And how their voices changing was a sort of metaphor for that. And I don't know, there's a broader lesson here for the American media landscape, I think, which is responsible for creating what I will now thoughtfully frame as something that's like kind of part of the whole toxic masculinity landscape, right? And having music be the entry point, and which is helpful because they've all, you know, these boys in the documentary have all been in choirs the whole time. They want to stay in choir. That's their thing. But having music be the entry point through which you might fight some aspects of toxic masculinity as we've come to feel it in our media. I mean, can't music be the one arena in which we feel cool with being affected?
And this is a big question right now because, you know, on the one side, you've got all of these social forces that are creating this cult of toxic masculinity where there is a lack of vulnerability, a lack of expressivity, a lack of willing to feel things. And then the other side of the culture is trying to turn away from ideas of gender segregation and binary. And so it's really tricky because you've got boys living in the real world, right? Who they have their own sets of thoughts and concerns and their own social organizing that they do together. You know, like if you just put kids alone on a playground, they're going to do what they're going to do. And then there are these kids, and a lot of them find their way into this choir who are sort of caught in between. And I think that that's something that's reflected here. And I think that that's a real tension that's going on in the landscape of boys' choirs from what little I know about this right now.
Well, there's so many kind of interesting, I mean, this could have just been I think what Will wanted it to be which was a video about how the boys' choir deals with puberty and how it trains them through it. But there's kind of a lot of other interesting societal threads that we've pulled at here. So let us know what you think, listeners. Links in the show notes, and let's go on to our third topic.
Does classical music have a drinking problem? A recent post by Hugh Morris on I Care If You Listen, a blog supported by the American Composers Forum, examines the intertwining of alcohol use and classical music. The post, part of a 10-part series called Casting Light that, quote, explores the often invisible inequities in contemporary art spaces, argues that the drinking scene, both by musicians and audiences alike, exclude those who are alcohol-free. Morris writes, the awkwardness, apathy, and sometimes downright hostility alcohol-free musicians face regularly stem from an inability to consider the people left out of the prevailing orthodoxies. He points to a 2019 study of over 600 musicians in the UK that revealed that musicians drink 84.4 units per month on average, 33.8 units more than the average consumption by the general population. So, do we have a drinking problem?
Well, I'm pretty sure that I don't because I am a non-drinker myself, but I don't know. Do you guys come across this?
No, but that maybe makes you the most clear-eyed in your assessment of whether we have a drinking problem, right? I mean, The question that this article addresses to us is who gets excluded or ends up being not able to be fully part of our world because of our drinking problem.
You know, I was thinking about this, and of course, it's something I think about every once in a while. I mean, so I did drink at a point in my life. I mean, I started when I was 21. I was a very law-abiding citizen. And then I drank, you know, just like a normal 20-something does, you know, probably a little too much sometimes. But, you know, I gave it up because my body really kind of rejected it by the time I was in my late 20s. And at some point I was, you know, I would very rarely drink. And when I did, it was in social situations, oftentimes in, you know, like a post-concert reception or whatever. And it would make me feel like total garbage, just absolute garbage almost right away, but definitely the next day. And it was not even so much that my tolerance lessened, which it did, but just my tolerance for feeling bad also lessened. And so at some point I was just like, there's no rule that says you have to do this. And so I was like, I'm not going to do it. And so now, like, if I'm in a social space, which is like a reception or a party type thing, I mean, nobody gives two hoots if I'm drinking. I don't even really drink tea. I don't even like to have a liquid past, about 6 or 7 p.m. But if I go, I usually just drink a hot water with lemon in it. And that's what I do. And nobody cares. I mean, it's like, I think it's, I understand why people would feel like, you're going to be excluded or whatever. But in adult spaces, it's just like, who cares? But I know that this is a more serious concern, so we should get into the meat of the article. What did you guys think of it?
This is the latest in a string of topics that we've done here on the podcast that makes me more aware of how the British landscape differs from our American one. Because I do know that I think that there is a more general kind of national crisis level of alcohol consumption in the UK than there is even here. And I'm on the same page as you, Will, where it's like, I never drank very much. I can probably count on my hands the number of times I've really drunk to excess and really regretted it. And frankly, if you're just a mature person who is able to like state your preferences without fear of reprisal, then what's the big deal about this? And the question I guess that I'm interested in here is, are there situations as a musician in which you are expected to drink?
I think so. I mean, like when you're an assistant, I don't know, Will, you can probably explain, talk about your experience as an assistant at a big orchestra. But, sometimes when you're covering a guest conductor and they're nice enough to invite you to a dinner after the show, they'll usually get a bottle of wine or a bottle of champagne or something. And, people like doing toasts in our world, I guess. And so there is this kind of expectation to be like, well, yes, thank you. I'll have a glass of champagne, sure, and just, we'll toast. And I also don't drink very much, so I know that I need to stop after one. But there's obviously been times where I felt maybe I shouldn't have more, but I did, just because everybody else on that table or whatever, when you're going out, like, people are doing it, so why not, So I would say there is definitely some situations in which we are expected or maybe even pressured socially to do it.
What drinking symbolizes or seems to symbolize in this case, or the case that we're talking about, is like, well, one, it's social lubrication, right? I mean, you find something to do. We just finished talking about what adults do. It's talk and drink, right? I mean, that's sort of like, because you're not going to be like, hey, you want to play tag? But, so what would you guys say would be an acceptable other activity that people would freely engage in or expect others to engage in? I mean, eating is always the one, right? If you're going to a place where you can eat.
Yeah, I think that eating is the thing. And I don't know.
Even eating, Will, as a vegan, I mean, like, that must make you an outsider most of the time, if not all of the time.
Much more so. Yeah, that's much more of an issue than being a non-drinker. Oh, totally. And also because, like, I don't care if other people are drinking. But whereas, like, I strongly prefer not to be in a situation where I'm surrounded by, like, a bunch of meat or non-vegan food, quite honestly. But, it's interesting in a way, like, in terms of the takeaways of this article. Yeah, I mean, there's the issue that, we're Americans and this is written by a Brit, but I wonder if this is more pertinent to people who are gigging musicians, because that seems to be the angle that this was going at, and the idea that you get gigs, the more you're like a bro, or the more that you hang and you go and, hang out at the pub. And I wonder if there is any cultural difference in terms of that, in terms of American-European divide. Like, in America, is it more just about how you are professional and if you show up and do your job and everything? But, the thing is, there's a lot of people who are professional and show up and do their jobs. So if the balance is going to be, well, I get to go to the bar afterwards with my friend, why would I hire this person than the other person? What do you guys think of that?
This is a great point, Will, because in my friends over in the UK often comment on how it is the case where there's a sort of insider and outsider to the freelancer community, and it can be extremely insular. And it is basically insular in exactly this way, where there are certain things that are not in the job description where you might just be expected. I mean, the other example that comes to mind is sometimes people talk about how in Asia, Japan and China particularly, like it's expected in the business community, you can't go home when work ends. You're not going home at 5 to be with your family. You have to go out and drink with your boss. That is an expectation. And I think this is sort of a sort of microcosm of the same attitude, where there's certain extra job responsibilities, social responsibilities that you can't really get away with and hope to advance, or you can't really get away with not doing and hope to advance.
The article kind of, to paraphrase, was mentioning how there are certain kind of like mythological stories of artists that can drink a lot. I mean, I think about Sibelius, people always say like, oh yeah, he stopped writing because he could just, be alone in his cabin in Finland and just drink his days away. Or, I thought about actually do you know the story about how the first symphony of Rachmaninoff was a flop? And supposedly, allegedly, it was Alexander Glazunov that conducted the first performance, and apparently he was drunk during the performance of it, and that's the reason why that it flopped, because it was just a mess and all this. So does it lend like cachet to these like artists that they drank a lot? Like is that something that people kind of like respect in our industry when we talk about great composers, great artists that also drank a lot?
I don't think that's unique to the industry per se, right? There's always, people have always had some sort of ego invested in how much they can drink and still act as if they haven't drunk any. I think that is a culture-spanning, society-spanning, unfortunate attitude towards, is the idea of tolerance, and that being somehow, something to be proud of.
Yeah, I think that in the case of these legendary musicians that you're talking about, sometimes it does go into their myth making. This idea, usually because it turns them into something like a tragic figure. And I do see it as a tragedy that Sibelius sat around in his cabin in the woods for the last 30 years of his life and didn't, was capable of so much, could have given so much more, but instead was just, this is part of the reason that I don't drink. It's just like I like the consistency. I eat the same thing for breakfast every morning, and I go to bed at the same time every day. And I want to be able to function at my highest ability. Part of what I thought when I was reading this and thinking about this is just that, like, for some people, drinking it's something that helps them get through the day in a way. But my perspective is sort of the opposite. It's like, being a musician is hard enough. It's really hard. Like, you got to go out and find this work and practice all the time and like perform at this very high level. And why would you do something that's going to hamper that activity? I get that, it's sort of fun. I had fun drinking when I used to drink, and it didn't totally destroy my body. But, I get a little bit of sociability, and that's why I don't have any, moral qualm with it. But you don't make that much money. Like, it's expensive to drink a lot, spend a lot of your money on booze. So I don't know. If people ask me, I would recommend against it, quite honestly. Like, and again, it's like I don't have any moral say in this, but I just think it's a good way to simplify a life that can be very complex already.
I think society has two answers to your question, Will, neither of which, of course, is like that meaningful, but I think that they exist in the general way we approach it. One is that because musician life is so hard, you should get a reward at the end, and this is your reward, right? Yeah. This is a kind of a reward-based culture, which frankly, for me, that's a very sad way of approaching it. I drink sometimes because I really enjoy it, and that's not my reward for going through the pain of being a musician. But that is the way that people often think. They come off stage and like, yes, I've earned my beer or whatever. Yes, exactly. Which I think is, okay, whatever. But the other, maybe more insidious answer to your question, I think, is that it's not necessarily clear to anyone, including musicians, that engaging in activity like taking drugs or drinking alcohol is actually inhibitive to what we do. And we all have this kind of wish. This gets back to the pride about having a high tolerance. We all have this wish or romanticized notion that, in fact, doing these crazy things actually enhances what we do. Right. And this, you probably see more of this in weed culture or hallucinogenics than you see in alcohol. But I think it's kind of part of the same gestalt where, because we're in the creative arts, it's somehow, more permissive for people to engage in these, what society has restrictively deemed as retrograde behaviors. So that's what I would like to dismantle about this frankly, is like the idea that, because what we do is somehow seen as, intrinsically motivated or creative, that somehow there's more room or more acceptability or even an enhanced effect that taking drugs and drinking alcohol has to it.
I mean, it's interesting that our conversation took us to like this area where I feel like, I think we all agree that if there is a gigging culture in which you do need to go out and drink with your colleagues so that you can get more gigs, and that's the only way that you can kind of like assure that you have gigs lined up, then maybe we need to
That's pretty sad.
Yeah, we should maybe examine that. But to each their own, I guess, in terms of how you wind down after a concert.
Well, and also part of how we standardize the behavior of not having to do that is if you don't feel like drinking, don't drink.
That's okay.
Have a water with lemon. It's totally cool. Other adults are going to be totally cool with it.
I've done seltzer and lime and told people that was a gin and tonic many times.
Yeah, that's right. You can always fake it if you really feel the social pressure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. With that, we will soberly go on to our classical mixtape.
In our classical mixtape, we each recommend some music that's caught our ear this week to share with our listeners. So, Tiffany, what do you have this week?
So this week I have a short wind quintet anthem called Umoja by Valerie Coleman. And Google Docs here keeps trying to correct Umoja to emoji, but it is spelled Umoja. And this is performed by the Imani Winds. There is a way more extended orchestral version of this, which is not the same as this at all. I mean, it has this in it, but it is not the same.
Oh my gosh, I like that so much. What a great classical mixtape recommendation. Thank you, Tiffany. All right, Kensho, what do you have here?
So quite unintentionally, I am recommending a Swedish composer after watching a documentary about Swedish choir singing. But I came across Wilhelm Stenhammar because I was watching a Facebook stream of the Symphonyorchester Bayerischer Rundfunk this week with Herbert Blomstedt, and he was talking about how he is now in his 90s, and he, if there's any time to be a champion of a composer that is not well known, it is now, which I found very interesting. And he on that program was Stenhammar's first piano concerto, I believe, and so that kind of put me onto his works. I listened to the symphonies. For me, meh, but the Serenade that I came across was quite fun and interesting, so that's what I'm bringing to you this week. And the performance is by Herbert Blomstedt, of course, and the Gothenburg Symphony Orchestra.
Interesting. Well, this is one that I will definitely have to investigate further, but what a great suggestion for our listeners. All right, well, 'tis the season of Advent right now, and there's so much amazing Adventide music. I mean, for me, this is the season of Handel's Messiah right now, and of course, in the choir that I sing in, I mean, we're just doing all of this glorious, glorious choral music. But a traditional piece of Adventide is the Magnificat, which of course it exists in thousands upon thousands of settings. But I just thought, like, we gotta go back to the OG this week. It's Big Daddy Johann Sebastian Bach, the Magnificat, and specifically I am recommending the charming Esurientes movement, here performed by the Netherlands Bach Society with Martin Engeltjes, the alto soloist. Oh, a male alto. I guess his voice hasn't changed. You'll find the links to all these and to our full classical mixtape playlist in the show notes.
And with that, it's time to wrap up this episode of the Classical Gabfest. I'm Tiffany Liu, and on behalf of Kensho Watanabe and William White, I'd like to thank you so much for listening and to encourage you to subscribe and rate us on your podcast app. We'd also love your help spreading the word about the show on social media, where you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can reach us at classicalgabfest@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, happy listening, and we'll be with you next week. Do either of you remember a period in which it was hard to control your voice?
Yes, I still have a problem today.